Born to be king, princes of the unit. This is a different thing, isn't it? Whatever, there can only be one! Yes, hello interwebs. Despite my Highlander referencing intro there, today we are going to be reviewing Masters of the Universe Revelation Part 1, the series that was executive produced by Kevin Smith and released its first 5 episodes of its first season over on Netflix just last week. So I kind of want to start this review kind of talking about where I came into this series from, because I think my perspective is kind of a unique one in sort of the discourse going on around this show right now. Because honestly, outside of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, which is another show that was released on Netflix that I absolutely adored, one of my favorite animated shows of all time, which really honestly has almost nothing to do with this iteration of Masters of the Universe at all, other than the fact that they're both kind of vaguely in the same franchise, as it were, the like He-Man-averse or whatever you want to call it. But anyways, other than that show, I really have no touchstone at all with He-Man or Masters of the Universe or really anything to do with this show that I think began in about the 80s and was intended to sell toys and things like that. So coming into the show, I really had no knowledge of the characters or sort of like awareness of the arcs and the storylines that had gone on before, especially considering that this show is a direct continuation of that old series, sort of picking up right where it left off, at least presumably. Again, I don't know those old shows. So I don't know if there was like stuff skipped, what's going on, all of that stuff. My only touchstone really awareness of this is sort of like the stuff that all of us kind of know through cultural osmosis, like Skeletor, like, and for the power of Grayskull, and I have the power, and all that stuff. And so sitting down to watch these 5 episodes, I was kind of concerned that I really wasn't going to get invested into it, that this show was going to require a lot of nostalgia to get into it, especially knowing that Kevin Smith was making it. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Kevin Smith, but the guy likes to make a lot of references, loves to do a lot of in-depth stuff, kind of like to have you be in the know, which works if you are in the know on stuff, but unlike She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, it seems like a very good in point. This didn't seem like it was going to be a natural starting place for me to really get into this franchise. But that being said, I really loved these 5 episodes. Again, having no touchstone with the rest of the franchise at all. I think the first episode of this series did kind of a great job kind of doing all the things that I sort of had picked up about the series through cultural osmosis. Sort of like you have Skeletor attacking Castle Grayskull, you have He-Man transforming and battling Skeletor and doing all this stuff, while also simultaneously doing a good job to giving you enough about the different characters that are in play within this series to sort of give you an idea of who they are, what they're doing, how they're, being set up, without feeling like they were taking away from any of their characterization from before, sort of building upon it. For example, the opening sequence really has us taking place during a party for Teela, who's about to be promoted to Man-at-Arms and sort of gain her place within this court. And so you get a little chance to meet everyone, like Cringer being kind of a scaredy cat. You have Orco being this sort of like funny kind of failed sorcerer, but who seems like it has like a decent heart inside. You have Man-at-Arms, who seems like this tough guy, but really kind of like it's softer than he appears on the outside. You have Prince Adam, who seems like the goody two-shoes who can transform to He-Man. You have Skeletor fighting people. You have the sorceress of Grayskull sort of protecting it. It just seems like it has all the highlights of what this show was and kind of a good introduction place without confusing or seeming to off-put any of the people that came before. Again, I can't speak for them, but for me, I seem to get it without feeling like I was lost in any case. Moving into it further, though, what I liked about this first episode was it kind of blows apart the mythology in a really interesting way. We're going to go full into spoilers here, but we learn that there's this sort of underground part of Grayskull, and there's sort of a magic that keeps all of Eternia together, and it gets destroyed by Skeletor. Skeletor finally wins his battle and gets what he wants, and it sort of destroys Eternia and separates magic all across Eternia and really almost dwindles it down to be destroyed. And this sets us up for a great time jump in the second episode where we follow Teela. And now I know that there have been a lot of discussions around Teela and the focus of this series on that character as opposed to He-Man. There's been both good faith commentary about that from people who feel like, they were portrayed, like, they really were expecting He-Man show and didn't really get that. And it kind of feels like this isn't really a reboot, but kind of a complete other thing. I can understand those criticisms, especially when the marketing of this show didn't really put that up front. They put it as like a He-Man centric show. There's also been some toxic side of that too. He's like, oh, how dare a show follow a female interest, and there's all that stuff too, and how let's attack, Kevin Smith, and he sucks, and he's the worst, and all that jazz. Let's not even talk about that. But I understand the good faith argument here. For me, though, personally, what I liked about this, though, is that it set me up for a new journey within this series. It didn't sort of set me up for, like, doing the same old thing, the stuff that I kind of got through cultural osmosis is sort of like, we're going to battle for Grayskull, kind of do the same thing over and over again and battle these different people. But there's a larger story, a bigger mythology that starts to be put in play, like Eternia needs to come together. And we get different characters on different sides of the line having to change allegiances because of that. And for me, as someone who doesn't know these characters like Evelyn or Cringer or Tila or things like that, Man-at-Arms, getting chances to meet them in new ways and sort of get to know them in a new way that isn't sort of the archetypical, like, I am a villain and will battle you way was kind of cool for me, because I know Skeletor, I know He-Man, I kind of got the gist of them through cultural osmosis, but this is a way for me to get to know these characters on new terms, and also set up a brilliant story arc into this universe for me. I also really liked that the sort of idea that was being set up here is, now that magic has been separated from Eternia, we start to see this technological thrust going through here. Like, some of the villains are really relying on technology. The Snake Mountain people are sort of becoming, like, worshipping the holy motherboard and things like that. And it starts to become this sort of magic, nature versus technology stuff that, I don't know, again, if that's a part of the mythology just in general, but it certainly was a thing over in She-Ra, sort of an idea of going on there, that sort of technology versus nature, and sort of finding a combination of the two, with magic sort of being a stand-in for nature. And I really like that being brought over here as well, again, without knowing if that's part of the actual mythology or not. Also, I just really loved the characters that we came to know. I think Orco is the standout character. Again, without spoiling too much of the series, he has some of the best moments in the series, the best scenes in the series. He initially comes across as this character who is just played for laughs, but you really get the sense of, like, he really looks down upon himself. But he has, like, a really tragic arc in a lot of different ways, but finally, like, standing up for himself. And I'm sure that he will come back at some point. But I just really think Orco just really tugged at my heartstrings and really surprised me here. Cringer, even though Cringer didn't get a lot to do here, I really loved his portrayal as, like, this sniveling, like, cat and, like, kind of scared, but then sort of standing up and getting Tila involved in the adventure and really convincing her after her betrayal of not knowing Prince Adam's secret that he was He-Man, getting her to invest in, like, oh, I still want to be the hero of this story. And I really enjoyed that. Question, though, and this is for the people who watched He-Man back in the day: what are the ethics of Cringer, who clearly is a scaredy cat, does not want to get involved in fights, being transformed into a brave cat whenever Prince Adam turns into He-Man? Like, because I saw that in the first episode, I'm like, that doesn't seem ethical. Cringer clearly does not want to get involved, and then you're transforming him, and is that, like, against his will? Like, he clearly doesn't want to transform and go fight. Like, there's a lot of ethical questions with me and Cringer going on here. But I putting it aside, it's a cartoon, I can put it aside. But it was just question for me. The other things too is I loved the, like, gravitas and weight that a lot of this stuff, that a lot of this show brings to it. Like the entrance in episode 3, where the crew is entering Subternia, and you get this sense of, like, dread and foreboding and fear that you feel when they're going into Subternia. And this show really makes you feel those grand, big, sweeping moments throughout the show. Like, it really feels like this is a grand adventure, grand franchise that we're going on here. Now, Subternia doesn't really live up to that in that sense, but you really get the sense of weight that the series brings, and yet it never loses, like, its sense of fun either. There's some good, funny moments throughout here as well. The things that I feel like there are some negatives that I'll put here. It's very clear that this season feels very clipped and short. Like, there's just stuff that I'm like, I really wish they just, I don't know, I wish they had either released it weekly or released it all at once instead of this, like, 5-episode thing, because it was like, I was very much I felt like I was just getting going, just getting invested in this story, and then it got cut off, and I don't really know when the next part is going to release here. And so I really wish the series had done the weekly format where I could kind of build up to it week to week, or they had just released the whole season all at once, because otherwise, as it sits now, I'm kind of feeling like a little bit like, I was just getting invested in this, and now I have to sit and wait. And maybe that's what they want. Maybe they want to leave me wanting more, but ultimately I kind of feel a little bit frustrated in that. That also being said too, I don't know where the rest of the series is going to go, but it does really feel like they're setting up a lot of things that are just going to be coming back later. Like, we know when He-Man gets killed in the first episode, He-Man's not really dead. Skeletor, probably not dead either. Orco, maybe he's dead, probably not either. There's just a bunch of stuff that this season sets up that are like, oh look, these people are dead, and you're like, I doubt that. And you can really feel that you kind of know it's going to be coming back later on, and it kind of loses the stakes when they sort of set up these big grandiose moments that I know are kind of going to get undone just a little while later. And so I don't necessarily know if I have a solution for that, but the stakes of this show feel big at one hand and also kind of undercut itself on the other hand, because I know that some of these stakes aren't going to stick, if that makes sense, overall. And then the final negative is there is some stuff that clearly I am missing because I am a new fan to the series. As I said, as someone who does not have a connection to this franchise really at all, I feel like there was just some stuff that I missed here and there. And that's sort of the hard weight of it, because I feel like if they want to pay homage to the fans in that way, I feel like that's okay, and that totally makes sense. And they do a good enough job of onboarding me as someone who has not seen the series to really get invested in it. But there's like some stuff like references here and there that I don't really get. And it wasn't in a way that made me like kind of excited to find out what the rest of the references were. Like, for example, I look at like Star Trek Lower Decks, which has a bunch of Star Trek references, but I know that those references kind of get me excited about learning more and kind of give me context for them. Where here, we're sort of like shoved into like Snake Mountain or whatever, and I don't really know what that is in the mythology of the show, what that means within the mythology of the show, and the episode doesn't really do a lot to show me how much it's changed from what it used to be to what it is now, because they've sort of changed into this technological masterpiece stuff, and I'm like, was the technological aspect always there? How much has it changed? How much has it brought a part of it? And so there's like this little bit of confusion for me as someone who's not a longtime fan, sort of being like, oh, where does this sit within the like arc of these characters in the show, and how much has it changed? Like how much of this world been irrevocably damaged in some way? I don't really have context for that. Again, I don't really know how well the show could have balanced that given the time constraints that they had, but it is something, just someone who does not know the mythology of it, it's a little bit lost on me, and I feel like that's a little bit of just my perspective kind of adds to the show. So overall, I really liked this 5-episode arc. I'm very excited to see where it goes. I'm kind of invested in it. I don't think it's as good as She-Ra or anything like that, but I do think I'm really enjoying it. I'm curious to see where it's going to go, and yeah, I'm in for it. And, you know, screw toxic fans who are all ranting about toxic stuff, but I do see the good faith arguments as well around the show. So that's all my thoughts on this season of Masters of the Universe. I would love to see your thoughts down in the comments below. Are you a longtime fan of this series? Did I get things wrong? Is there stuff I'm missing? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you feel betrayed? I really would love to hear all of that. So yeah, let's get that discussion going. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy.